Hey, how are you? I'm Slice of Otaku, and with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 set to be released on May 23rd of 2023, we are still quite a ways away from the film's release. But that does not stop news from circulating, especially not when it comes to a series grossing over $1.6 billion in revenue. Now, most recently, in an interview with Deadline on their Hero Nation podcast, director James Gunn shared some very interesting bits of information in regards to the future of this team that we all know and love. And that is the fact that the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will be the very last time that we see this team of Guardians. This is the end of their journey together. Now, Gunn admits that they could have very well gone for a fourth installment, but ultimately that sort of thing would have been a disservice to the characters and their respective stories. By concluding things with Volume 3, the team aims to remain true to the characters and story, all while providing fans with a satisfying wrap-up. Now, this information is to me, more than anything else, a confirmation of prior sentiments. Back when Guardians 2 was on the verge of release, Gunn sat down with Toronto Sun and pretty much alluded to the very same thing, that this particular group's story concludes with the third installment. Now, with that being said, this does not mean that the Guardians of the Galaxy in name will no longer be a part of the MCU. This news is specifically regarding the current roster of characters, and considering the current shift of focus with Phase 4 of the MCU, as plenty of new faces are now said to be taking up the mantle, it makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, when it comes to the comic iterations, there have been a whole slew of different Guardians over the years, and so there are plenty of characters who may be able to be adapted to the big screen and carry on the Guardians name. The Guardians of the Galaxy, to me, even more so than the Avengers perhaps, is a family. And so with that in mind, even if we don't have Guardians content for a little while, with the upcoming edition of the Fantastic Four, yet another superpowered group with a family dynamic, the void should in theory be filled to some extent. Now, Gunn has furthermore gone on to say that this final movie will be pretty different from what many fans will be expecting, describing it to be a really big film that is very deep and actually pretty dark, which most certainly fascinates me a whole lot. I mean, what this guy and his team have been able to do with these characters has been nothing short of brilliant. Really and truly, prior to the release of the first movie, only so many people had ever heard of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and excitement levels could hardly compare to the likes of Earth's Mightiest Heroes. But now at this point, they are a cultural phenomenon all their own. But even more than that, these are to me some of the deepest characters in the MCU today. Don't get me wrong, there are a bunch of ridiculous goofball screw-ups for sure, but beneath the layer of humor and silliness that they have is a bedrock of trauma and pain. To wrap the story of these characters up in a way that really makes sense is inherently going to be an emotional ordeal. With Guardians Volume 2, as a team leader, we pretty much already received Star-Lord's issues taking center stage as he faced his father Ego. For Drax, his past was heavily associated with Ronan, who of course is no longer among the living. And the same goes for Thanos, so he's for the most part pretty resolved. As far as we know, Mantis isn't troubled much at all and is instead more of a counselor of sorts for this group of helpful troublemakers. And the most recent addition in the form of Thor has his own movie coming out beforehand to deal with anything that may be going on with his character. Which of course then leaves us with Nebula, Groot, Rocket, and potentially Gamora to consider. Now, Gamora was indeed sacrificed by her adopted father Thanos in exchange for the Soul Stone and is no more. However, a different Gamora is still around despite not being affiliated with the Guardians. That being said, we know the Guardians intend to continue pursuing her, but this is a far more savage Gamora that we are talking about, and so finding herself beyond the teachings of strength instilled in her by her father may prove to be rather trying. Groot is great, but like Gamora, the Groot today is not the same as the one we began the series with, and so depth is not something I am especially expecting from this character, at least not in regards to past traumas and such. Nebula is a character that has certainly come a long way since the service of her mad tyrant of a father. Despite the horrific emotional and physical abuse she endured for the vast majority of her life, she has really come into her own as a better person. Following her time with the Avengers and now being a proper member of the Guardians, I suppose all that's really left for her character would be to find and embrace her time-displaced sister Gamora. Nebula is a brilliant character that is more or less complete, to be quite honest. Which finally brings us to Rocket Raccoon. Now, James Gunn notes his rendition of Rocket to be one that he relates to more than any other character he has ever created, so much so that he can barely think of the character without being moved. When asked whether or not Rocket's origins would be present in Guardians 3, he admitted that Rocket will be a big part of what is happening in the future, as when it comes to things like the scars present on his back, this has all been set up for things he has been planning for the character all along. In fact, the scene first featuring Rocket's cybernetic augmentations is one of Gunn's favorite scenes, expressing that, quote, Rocket's loneliness and disaffection is at the center of the franchise for me. And when you think about the many things Rocket's been made to experience over the course of these films, even without the direct inclusion of his origins, it does make a whole lot of sense.
Well, I didn't ask to get made. I didn't ask to be torn apart and put back together over and over and turned into some little monster.
He lost his best friend in the form of Groot, only to then become the surrogate father of the new Groot, then losing his son right before his eyes with the snap. This character has been through a whole lot, so suffice to say, Rocket's past will be confronted and at the forefront of this final movie in some way. But how? Well, we do know that Adam Warlock, set to be played by Will Poulter, will be present. In the comics, Adam Warlock is one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe, which was majorly on account of the Soul Stone, which for the time being, along with the other Infinity Stones, has been reduced to atoms in our present timeline and universe. Technically, they are fundamental aspects of existence, and so they can never be completely erased, but for storytelling purposes, it would seem that the era of the stones is over, as to bring them up again would be a bit tired. Now, the reason I bring the stones up at all is on account of who gave Adam Warlock the stone in the comics. In the post-credit scene for Guardians Volume 2, we had Aisha, the golden high priestess of the Sovereign, create the perfect Sovereign in the form of Adam Warlock in an attempt to destroy the Guardians. But the person to give Adam Warlock the Soul Stone was known as High Evolutionary, who I presume will be the big bad of Guardians 3. Shikuriyuji is set to appear in Guardians 3 as a yet-to-be-revealed role that he claims to be both extremely powerful and one of the most complex characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. High Evolutionary is absurdly powerful with damn near godlike abilities and has plenty of quirks to his character that could most definitely be considered complex. Even if Adam Warlock is intended for nefarious purposes, for the most part he is a hero, or at least an anti-hero in the comics, and assuming he's able to connect with the Guardians would be a wonderful addition to their future roster. High Evolutionary, on the other hand, is most definitely a villainous figure obsessed with, you guessed it, evolution. With the Sovereign being a highly advanced race of genetically engineered people, his involvement in some capacity or another totally makes sense. And now bringing things full circle, we have Rocket, who happens to be a genetic and cybernetically engineered raccoon-like creature hailing from the planet Half-World. When it comes to High Evolutionary, he has been known to genetically experiment on animals and possesses a planet known as Counter-Earth. However, the similarities between Counter-Earth and Half-World are close enough for me to believe that the MCU might just disregard Counter-Earth and have Half-World be associated with High Evolutionary as well. Which isn't all too far-fetched considering things like how there is no Oscorp in the primary MCU, yet Spider-Man is of course still a man that got bit by a radioactive spider. Dealing with High Evolutionary in this third installment could be Rocket facing his abuser, as well as going back to where his life began. And even if High Evolutionary isn't the man directly responsible, the ability to potentially connect with the likes of Adam Warlock as another genetically altered entity and facing off against someone who would manipulate living things as High Evolutionary would certainly sounds like some really heavy stuff for the character to encounter, so it may hold a similar weight regardless. The Guardians of the Galaxy are not the sort of group that would be undone by something minor, and so for them to no longer be made up of the same team composition will take some big developments. Perhaps even death. I mean, we did have the tease of a character death from James Gunn himself by way of Instagram, but knowing how MCU folks can be, if taken literally, this could simply be a reference to the death of some nameless stooge. But if this movie is as dark as he says it is, coupled with his admittance of crying a multiple times while writing it, I feel like death is pretty much a given. I mean, there is of course the title color theory, which points towards who will die based on the color of the film's logo, which would point towards the death of perhaps Drax, but whatever the case may be, I'm sure we'll see some happy endings as well as some tragic ones, but one way or another, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 will be the end of the Guardians as we know them. And this is also the end of the video where I ask you to subscribe to the channel with notifications on, because there is plenty more MCU and general pop culture content to come. This is our very first video covering the MCU, and so really and truly any support is most definitely appreciated. We also have a brand new channel by the name of Plot Armor Comics for more comic dedicated content beyond the cinematic stuff, so you should definitely check us out over there because it is going to be a wild ride. For the longest while, I struggled with releasing content on this channel, but considering how much uploading we do over on Plot Armor in terms of anime and manga, I figured the real issue lies in interest and enthusiasm, and since I absolutely love all things MCU, this should be a perfect fit, and I hope you enjoy what is to come. Thank you all so much for watching, and have an awesome day. I love you.